computer. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Lassie Lounge, and I'm delighted to have the lovely Kate Muir with us today. Hi Kate.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Pleasure. Now, I'm sure most of you know Kate, but for those who don't, Kate's the author of The Great Menopause Scandal, which will be published next year. She's also the creator of an upcoming campaigning Channel 4 menopause documentary with Davina McCall. She is on the board of the Menopause Charity and Bird's Eye View, which campaigns for women in film. But Kate, you're probably best known as the chief film critic, well, certainly in my family, of the Times, and a features writer for the newspaper in New York, Paris, and Washington. And Kate's also written 3 amazing novels called Suffragette City, Left Bank, and West Coast. So welcome.
Thank you. That was a huge introduction. Thank you.
Very impressive. So look, Kate, before we talk about the Great Menopause Scandal, could you tell us first a little bit, because obviously we talk a lot about perimenopause and menopause in the Lassie Lounge, because that was obviously my background and why we set this platform up. Could you tell everyone a little bit about your own experience with menopause? And
yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here if it had not been such a car crash. And it wasn't just a car crash, it was the full Thelma and Louise off the cliff. And I completely didn't realise anything about perimenopause. Went to my doctor in my late 40s with heart palpitations, thought I was dying, as many people do. But as it turns out, 11% of women get heart palpitations in perimenopause. But my doctor sent me off for lots of tests that probably cost the NHS huge amounts of money. And I was also just feeling terrible and very sort of mentally unstable. And, my relationship broke up. I moved out. It was a massive mess in my life. And I went to my doctor a couple of times while I still had my periods, saying things are going wrong. And I came back with the Marina coil and nothing else. And it's clear to me now I was desperate for estrogen to balance out the sort of madness in my mind, and the hormones racing around my mind are rather not enough. So after all that happened, I was talking to a friend. She said, we don't talk about this, but everybody's going to this private clinic in London. That's how we're all dealing with it, but we're not saying. And so I went to this rather famous private clinic in London that I won't mention, and I got estrogen, progesterone and testosterone in a lozenge, and that was fantastic. Got my life back on track. I was back to normal. I could do my job. I could remember words. It was a miracle. Great. Then I got a new batch of the lozenges, and suddenly I got incredible bleeding, vaginal bleeding. I felt really weird. And it went on for about a month. I went in and I said, is there anything wrong? They said, oh, the lining of your womb looks okay-ish. They gave me a quick test. They sent me back with some more, another prescription. Then I went to the NHS. I said, this is wrong. I'm bleeding. What's happening? And they said, we're putting you on the cancer fast track. And I ended up having a cervical biopsy and a uterine biopsy, none of which are very nice. And I showed every single consultant I met this packet of pills from the private clinic, these lozenges. Not one of them said, come off those right away, or that they're crazy, or they just thought they were fine. They didn't really know what they were. And it was only when I met a friend later who introduced me to a doctor we all know, Louise Newson, and I'd come off the kind of dangerous HRT, and I went to see her, and she gave me the right kind. The kind that's available on the NHS, micronized progesterone and transdermal estrogen. And guess what? All my symptoms went away, and I was absolutely fine, and the bleeding went away. So that was cutting a long story long. But I think, so many women's experiences are that level of chaos. And what astonished me was that those 2 consultants in the NHS had not said to me, get off that private stuff. Here's the safer, here's the real stuff. That's what you should be on if you really need to be on it. And I thought, if the consultants in the NHS don't know, if I as an investigative journalist, because I was that before I was a film critic, don't know, what do normal, ordinary women who don't have the time and the energy and £500 to pay to a private doctor do? And I know that that's the story in the Latte Lounges. what happens when you don't get any help. And I just became so angry.
Yeah.
And so now I'm here doing a book and a documentary, which I never really meant to do. But I am, and I'm still storming. And the more stories I hear, as you know, you must feel the same, the angrier I get, and I'm just not going to stop.
I mean, I'd like to say I was surprised by any of that. Sadly, I've heard that sort of story for 4 years, so has probably so many of us who seem to have found ourselves doing these sort of things that we never imagined we'd be doing. We're all very angry midlife women determined to make change, and I'm obviously sorry and pretty shocking what you've been through. So I'm assuming this is what has sort of driven you to want to write this book, The Great Menopause Scandal. Tell us about it. How, you know, what's going to be in it, and what you've you know so far been doing, and you know, to fill it in.
Yeah. I think the main thing is, at all levels, it's about the great menopause knowledge gap. Women don't know, and also the GPs and doctors often don't know. Some of them know, but I mean, it's coming across these extraordinary statistics. Like there was a BMJ survey the other day, and 90% of female doctors of menopausal age didn't know what was going on and didn't know how to deal with their own menopause at work. And lots of them were afraid to report that to their own manager at work. And I thought, if doctors themselves cannot deal with this, what hope is there for ordinary women? And these things keep coming up. But one of the things I wanted to write was basically, you know, this is about medical sexism. And I read the book by Caroline Criado Perez called Invisible Women, which was all about, you know, tests only being carried out on men, you know, almost like pregnancy tests only being carried out on men. It was so bonkers that women were not considered worthy of medical tests in so much research. And I kept coming across stuff in the menopause story once I found out about estrogen, and once I found out about its superpowers in long-term health, you know, which, as you know very well, is, you know, it helps with dementia, it helps with diabetes, it helps with colon cancer. If it's transdermal, it helps with, you know, heart attacks and strokes. It just makes your body run. It's your oil in your system. And the idea that we're without this oil, you know, is shocking. And when I realized all the glorious and wonderful things that estrogen does, apart from, you know, stopping your hot flushes, I thought, why is nobody telling me this story? Why does nobody believe this story? Why does nobody believe that there's fantastic health opportunity for most women to live a much happier, longer life in much more comfortable conditions? And why is there this silence? Yeah. And then obviously, and you know this story too, we come to the evil WHI study in 2002 with those screaming headlines that says, you will get breast cancer and die if you take HRT. Well, that's how women interpreted it. And as you also know, famously, you know, the women in that study were 63. They were giving the very older kind of oral HRT. And actually, the woman in the younger age group did quite well on it. But the headlines were scandalous and terrifying. And I think there's something else there that people, either women themselves felt guilty and were willing to come off it, or that newspapers loved this, making women scared about their breasts. I have no idea. There's something apart from science underlying this huge kind of trick that has been played on women who could have been looking after themselves in these past 20 years, but in fact haven't been because they've been terrified. What do you think?
I think, look, I think that report had absolutely was the worst, you know, the worst possible thing to have happened, because it wasn't just the women that came off. Doctors then lost confidence as well. I mean, the whole of Menopause Awareness Month, we were pretty much talking about it non-stop, and you know, it's just horrendous. And also the other thing that we haven't mentioned is the older generation. So our mums, you know, and their their mums and grandmas, you know, they didn't live as long as we're going to live, and you know, they died in their sort of late 50s when menopause was just starting. So there's been sort of no history to track. And as you say, you know, the benefits outweigh the harms, and everyone's so fixated on breast cancer, which is now actually way down the list of deaths, and actually things like Alzheimer's, which can be prevented. It's the only known prevention using estrogen. And I mean, I just think that the more of us that talk about it and expose it, which is amazing what you're doing, hopefully, we'll start to make change. Is the book aimed at women in general, or doctors, or medical students?
It's aimed at both women and doctors, because of course women are doctors, but it's aimed at a general audience. I suppose it's popular medicine and popular science, but it's not a how-to with your symptoms, going through the different ones. It's not a medical manual. I've been saying it's not a medical manual, it's a manual for revolution. And although so I've been talking about different women's stories, but I also absolutely nail the science and the footnotes. So there are maybe 20 footnotes or 30 footnotes that will cite the scientific papers. So a doctor reading it can read it in a very different way and go down the rabbit hole, if they want, of, HRT and Alzheimer's or whatever, and find out all about that. Because, the ordinary GP does not have time to do this research. And I've done a year's research because I've been in lockdown. And people have taken my calls at kind of Yale, and people who are giving my Alzheimer's in Wisconsin. I mean, so I've talked to people all around the world, and the head of the International Menopause Society in Australia. So I've got this huge picture of exactly how it's not working.
And it's an international, as you say, it's an international crisis and disaster, and actually it would save millions and millions of pounds. If you think about the amount of specialists you saw and I saw, and how dirt cheap HRT actually is, it's a no-brainer.
But what you were saying to me yesterday, when you first had to deal with all your menopausal problems, and you went to how many different specialists?
I went to about 5 different specialists. I went to a dementia specialist, a psychiatrist, a heart specialist, 5 GP, appointments. And you can imagine, and I'm a, fairly well, educated woman, but you can imagine, just women all over the country, and who are really, possibly in deprived areas, who don't have, the ability to seek out this sort of,
and the information, it's just almost invisible. I mean, it's getting more and more visible. And I think also the huge thing that I keep wanting to shout about is perimenopause. And I know, it happened to you in perimenopause, but I think the thing we need to say to women is, look out for what's coming in your 40s, or even earlier in some cases. But for most women, it's your late 40s, early to late 40s, that you really, really need to be keeping an eye on yourself. And if you're informed about your symptoms, you don't need to rush off and get HRT that second or do anything, but you can start looking at your life, the way you're living it, why you're panicking, why you can't drive, why you're having panic attacks. The mental health aspects of losing your hormones on a roller coaster at perimenopause are massive. And I've been interviewing lots and lots of people about that. I interviewed Sky Jingel, who was the chef at Petersham Nurseries, a Michelin-starred chef. And one day she walked out within a month, she walked out on her husband, her house, her restaurant with her Michelin star, and run off. And she only had 3 months to pay the mortgage. She had a couple of children. And she didn't know why she did it until afterwards. And she said it was menopause madness. I had no idea. And she just exploded with this kind of anger and frustration, and is only now, and is now running a wonderful restaurant at Somerset House called Spring, and has got her life back. But she had this 6 years of hell. I mean, I had about 3 years of hell myself. And I just think, oh gosh, if someone had told me none of that need to have happened, and all the collateral damage you cause emotionally to other people and to yourself. But, you can really, I feel very, very bad about what happened to my teenage, daughter at that time when I broke up with her dad or whatever. There are these things that happen that you can't stop them happening.
No.
But if you'd known what was happening to you, and some of the reasons, and the reasons are not all menopausal, there are other reasons, but I really, really wish I'd been able to do this in a more gentle manner, and I wasn't. And I just, even if there's 10 women that hear this message when they read my book, I will really care about that.
I think a lot more than 10 women are going to read it. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, when we were having a chat yesterday, I was saying that something as simple as, you know, when women turn 40, I know a lot of women suffer from premature ovarian insufficiency even in their 30s, but even at 40, if we got a letter from our doctors with a symptom checklist saying, you know, if you start to feel X, Y, and Z, it could be perimenopause. This is what it is. Perhaps have a chat with your doctor. You know, there's some very simple solutions. I mean, I think it's fantastic. You know, you're uncovering this and putting in a book, and I think with all the celebrities now talking about it, and lots of women and doctors campaigning, you know, as Diane Danzibrink has said, you know, I really think we're going to be the generation that do make change. Tell me, you know, this up and coming Channel 4 documentary, yes, at the moment it's of a similar name. Who are you working with on that?
So Davina McCall is our presenter, and she, of course, as it turns out, had a horrendous menopause herself. And this is a news and current affairs documentary, so it's slightly different. She's really being a reporter and investigating for us, which is, and she's very excited and very angry. But I mean, you know, in a nutshell, she had a terrible time, you know, before her period stopped. And was going through all these hot flushes and everything, you know, when she didn't think she even had menopause. And also in this television world, you know, they'd be saying, just don't mention it. Don't say, you can't manage the autocue, but just keep quiet and don't mention the menopause.
Yeah. And
I think that's really important. And she has then decided, right, I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to get the science right, and I'm going to talk to the women. And so she's really keen. And I mean, I feel kind of incredibly blessed that I've met her, and we connected up through the menopause movement. It wasn't like some celebrity thing, but, you know, so Louise knew her, people in the menopause charity knew her, we all connected up, and she's now one of the ambassadors for the menopause charity. I should just say who else are the ambassadors, which is Lorraine Kelly, who's fantastic and is expert on testosterone, which is quite exciting. Meg Matthews, whose book is just out and just has sold out, you know, the new hot. Liz Earle, who is real expert on this area. Her podcasts are really good. Did a great podcast with Nick Panay the other day, I thought, on HRT, that was really detailed stuff I really liked. And then Michelle Griffiths Robinson, who is the Olympic triple jumper. So she's on our menopause charity. She can also jump 14 meters. So I think that's incredibly important as a menopause.
And we're not saying that you can all jump that far on estrogen. It isn't that isn't that magic.
I don't know if she still do it, but she talks in a wonderfully public way about her own menopause and her relationship and her husband and how they're managing. And I just think the more people that can go public, I would love to see some of the great Hollywood faces go public. I'm waiting for that sort of dike to break and everyone confess, because it is, how do they look like that? How do they get away with it if they're not on a lot of hormones?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they're worried that they won't get cast in another film if they mention the M word. And you know, we were interviewing last month Dr. Avram Blooming, who wrote the book, as you know, Estrogen Matters, and he was saying, and we've got the most perfect soundbite from him, that men would never put up with this, and it needs rebranding. It needs to be called estrogen deficiency disease, or you know, to be, forget the word menopause, and as you say, if we're going to focus on anything, let's focus on perimenopause, because I think I have a nephew who's a final year medical student, and they're still being taught that if you haven't had any periods for a year and you're having hot flushes, it's then that you diagnose and treat. And I think we need to change that, and I know Diane is campaigning for that you know, the curriculum needs to be changed.
But what's interesting is it's got to come from women up and not the medical establishment down at this point, because so many people have struggled within the medical establishment to change this, and someone at the top of, you know, the medical schools at the top of the NHS should be saying, we need to have a menopause module. We need to teach doctors what happens, and we need to teach them how to work with the different kinds of HRT and hormones, because it's not just take it away and get on with it. As I discovered, you know, you need a certain amount to avoid bleeding, to avoid all sorts of things. You've got to be really careful about it as well. And the ignorance, just when you're I mean, you know, I'm also dealing with some local doctors, and I know what I need and want, and I've studied it, and they still don't know. And I went in to ask my local GP about testosterone, and she offered me Tibolone, which is not the best HRT and it hasn't got a particularly safe profile. And I said, can I get testosterone, because I've had it privately? And she said, no, I don't think we can do that. I think testosterone is another huge question. I've got a whole chapter on testosterone.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of women, we've been trying, come to our Facebook group and talk about lack of libido. And when you mention, have you spoken to your doctor about testosterone? They're like, oh, no, that's for men and I don't want to grow a beard. And it's about educating, actually what that hormone does for us.
And what was the astonishing thing when I was studying stuff in the book with what's the biggest female hormone? What do we produce most of? Testosterone. Who knew that? That is the ultimate sexist thing that we've not been told. And that, it's not just about libido. For me, it's massively, I didn't have a problem with my libido actually, massively about mental health and feeling sharp and remembering words. And there was a stage where I couldn't remember, there was one point where I was writing a shopping list before I was on HRT, and I was thinking, I must shave my legs. I must write down the word for the thing I shave my legs with. That's a shaver. And I couldn't think of the word razor. And I thought, and then I went into a complete panic, because it's different from not remembering the name of the third film director you've interviewed or whatever, but to not remember the name of an ordinary noun had never happened to me before in my life. And it just actually literally gave me a sort of panic attack, and that's actually sort of what pushed me to get HRT. But the testosterone makes a big difference to my brain, just a tiny bit. I don't have any extra hair anywhere. It's all been it's much less testosterone than my daughter has, who's about to be 21. So that's how much I'm taking. It's not as if it's even shocking. It's my natural hormone. It should be there. It makes my brain work. And that's been studied, but it's not why they prescribe it on the NHS. You can only ask for it for your libido.
Yeah.
I mean, bonkers. All these people, 1 in 5 women giving up their jobs, feeling like they can't add up, or don't know words, or can't speak in a meeting. And,
and also it's not a coincidence. The biggest rate of suicide, in women is between 45 and 55. There's a reason that people are left to feel like they're going mad or do go mad. And, I sadly hear about this all the time. Where can people buy the book? When's it going to be out? And also, when's the documentary going to be out?
Oh, okay. Well, COVID willing on all fronts. We're filming in December and January with Davina. So I presume we'll be out in March with the documentary on Channel 4, which will be on one of the 9 o'clock slots at Channel 4. The book is going to be out, I think, in June, but I will have greater knowledge of that quite soon, and I'll be able to tell you about that. So.
Okay, amazing. And just lastly, a couple of things lastly. I always like to ask our guests when they come on for a take-home message, a top tip, what you've learned, not just through your own journey, but from doing all this research for the book and the documentary. If you could give a piece of advice to anyone who's suffering at the moment.
I think one of the things is I always believed everything scientists and doctors said to me, and I don't anymore. And I think it's up to women to do their own research, to go on your website, to go on the Menopause Doctor website, download the NICE guidelines, know what they're going in to ask for, and kind of use the internet and know what you're doing. Because I think if you don't know what you're doing and you're not confident, you're going to suffer. And this is just something you're going to have to fight for, I think, for most women. I mean, you may be lucky and have the most fantastic GP, but I think 90%, won't know enough, and it's not the GP's fault. It's just the lack of knowledge. So go in arms. That's what I do.
Absolutely. And we must say that, a lot for some women, they don't want to take HRT, or perhaps they can't. And we're not saying it's for everyone. But what we always say is have an informed joint discussion with your doctor. And if your doctor's not sure, there are lots of menopause specialists out there. We've got a whole resources area on our website which can signpost women to menopause specialists, so has the BMS. And lastly, because we have touched on it, and I do want to talk about it because it's very topical, the Menopause Charity is a charity that Louise Newson has recently set up, and what's your involvement in that? And just tell us very briefly, because I've already obviously, we've interviewed Rebecca about it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, who's one of the doctors there. Yeah, tell everyone about your involvement and what you hope it'll achieve.
Yeah. Well, as a former journalist at the Times, I suppose I know a lot about the media contacts. So I'm on the executive board of the Menopause Charity, but I'm looking into the kind of media, PR, comms, marketing side, and helping just get all that set up so we can be incredibly professional on it. But I think one of the things this charity needs to do is not just about raising money, which is important to help women, and to educate doctors. But the other thing we need to do is we need to change the narrative. We need to change the story publicly. And when we change the narrative, the rest of the situation will fall into place. So we need to say, we need to talk about menopause in public. We need GPs to understand about menopause. We need to talk about it in the workplace. We need to debunk the myths around HRT. And if we can do those things, I think millions of women will have much better lives. And the millions of relationships will be a lot happier. And I think it's a no-brainer. It's so simple. It's so health-focused. Why can't we do it?
Absolutely. All right. Well, Kate, thank you so much for coming on, and good luck with the book and the documentary.
You're in the book and possibly in the documentary.
Okay, that's breaking news. I didn't know. Thank you. Thanks so much, Kate.
All right.
Thank you. Be well. Bye.